Long before it actually happened, Winston Churchill predicted war was coming between the Western powers and Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime, calling the rising tensions in Europe in the 30s a gathering storm. Likewise, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu has long been warning that if the West won't take decisive action to neutralize Iran's nuclear threat, Israel may have to do it alone. Now, as 2024 begins and the gathering storm with Iran and its proxies appears to be steadily approaching its climax, this is the question: is Netanyahu ready for the greatest political, geopolitical, and military challenge of his life? Good evening from Jerusalem. I'm Joel Rosenberg, host of the Rosenberg Report on TBN, with this YouTube exclusive, an inside look at the meeting that former Governor Mike Huckabee and I had recently with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's longest serving leader. It took place just before Christmas as the governor and I were co-leading a solidarity mission throughout the country of Israel, a delegation of evangelical Christian leaders to meet with Israeli hostage families, visit Israeli communities invaded and savaged by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, meet with Israeli and Palestinian pastors and ministry leaders and pray with them and for them for the peace of Jerusalem and the peace of everybody in this region, just as the scriptures command us. Now, as it happened, we were invited to come to the highly secure headquarters of the Israeli Defense Forces. It's known as the Kiryat, Israel's Pentagon in the heart of Tel Aviv. Actually, just before that meeting, we were having lunch across the street from the Kiryat, and rocket sirens went off. Rockets were being fired from Gaza, and this delegation that we were leading, for their first time ever, were having to evacuate and go down into the bomb shelter in the basement of that restaurant. So that was something that they had never been through, not even Governor Huckabee, even though he's been coming here for 50 years. But once we got to the Kiryat, for several hours, our entire group met with the Prime Minister's senior communications, public diplomacy, and foreign policy advisors. Why? To discuss how Israel can more effectively combat the avalanche of lies crashing down on them, on us, in the midst of this raging and bitter war. We also discussed how Israeli leaders can do more to call up the reserves, as I would put it, of millions of evangelical Christians to tell the truth about Israel and the Jewish people from pulpits, on podcasts, on social media, in print media, and on radio and television programs all over the United States and all over the world. Now, at one point, as those critical conversations continued with the rest of the delegation, Governor Huckabee and I were asked to step out of the National Public Diplomacy Directorate's war room and cross the Kiryat campus to the offices and wartime residence of the Prime Minister. Now, we have, of course, been praying for the opportunity to see him all that week, and we knew that with his intense schedule and constant emergencies interrupting even a normally hard day, we knew it might not happen. But consistent with Netanyahu's decades of building personal friendships with evangelical Christian leaders, the Prime Minister somehow found a way to carve out time. Netanyahu has long called the Christian community the greatest friends that the Jewish community and the Jewish state has. And few have understood the strategic value of the evangelical community and what the value that we have to Israel better than Netanyahu. After all, as precious and important as the global Jewish community is, it is still fairly small, right? With perhaps 15 to 17 million Jewish people worldwide. That's it, 15 to 17 million. By contrast, there are some 60 million evangelical Christians in the United States alone, and some 600 million evangelicals worldwide. Most evangelicals love the Bible and read it from Genesis to Revelation. Thus, most understand the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We understand the history of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so evangelicals understand and embrace, most evangelicals do, they embrace God's unique love and plan for Israel and the Jewish people. We know that the Lord once told the Israeli nation through Moses, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble at them, your enemies, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you." Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Evangelicals know that the Lord once told the Israeli people through the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I've drawn you with loving kindness." Jeremiah 31, verse 3. Evangelicals also know that David, our greatest king here in Israel, once wrote to his people, encouraging Israel to embrace these very truths. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," David wrote. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23, verses 1 through 4. And it's precisely because of these Bible passages and so many others that evangelicals know that God is not in the business of abandoning his chosen people. So we as Christians shouldn't abandon Israel and the Jewish people either. Look, this isn't at its core a political commitment to Israel. It's a theological commitment, and a deeply held one at that. And again, few Israelis understand this better than Netanyahu, and that's why for the past 3 decades he's consistently cultivated this strategic alliance, meeting with evangelical leaders, speaking at evangelical conferences, listening to evangelical concerns, and welcoming evangelical prayers, philanthropy, tourism, and yes, of course, political support. And while we would have preferred that our entire delegation had the opportunity to sit down and meet with the Prime Minister, the governor and I were grateful to be invited as the co-hosts of the group to sit down with Netanyahu. After clearing another round of security checks, the governor and I were taken up several flights of stairs and ushered into Netanyahu's private office. We were accompanied by Ophir Falk, the Prime Minister's foreign policy advisor, and Tal Heinrich, a spokeswoman who was hired by the Prime Minister on October 7th, after working for several years for me as a senior correspondent for All Israel News and as the senior producer for the Rosenberg Report on TBN. Now, to our surprise, Netanyahu wasn't inviting us to a quick pop-in to say hi and get a quick picture. The meeting ended up lasting almost 45 minutes. Wearing a dark suit and a crisp blue shirt, Netanyahu didn't strike me as harried or stressed or rushed, even though yet another salvo of rockets had just been fired by Hamas at Tel Aviv not too much earlier, as I noted before. Fortunately, those were quickly intercepted by the ever-faithful Iron Dome. To the contrary, the Prime Minister struck me as calm and laser-focused on winning this war once and for all. He was particularly happy, as you might guess, to see Huckabee, who is one of the most well-known and influential evangelicals in the United States, and of course, the host of Huckabee on Saturday nights on TBN. And these two have been good and faithful friends for decades. From the outset of the meeting, we reaffirmed to the Prime Minister that the overwhelming majority of evangelical Christians in the United States love and support the Jewish state and the Jewish people, despite such fierce and unrelenting attacks from so much of the rest of the world. We also affirmed to him that the fact that millions of evangelicals are praying without ceasing for him, for all the people and leaders of Israel, and for a quick and decisive victory over the forces of radical Islamism who are seeking Israel's total annihilation. Now, while we covered a range of issues related to the war, the road ahead, and ways to strengthen the Israeli Evangelical Alliance, I'm not really at liberty to share specifics of what he told us. But I do want to share in this video our reactions coming out of the meeting and some of my analysis of where I think we're heading. Governor Huckabee, for example, issued the following statement. He said, and I quote, "I've known the Prime Minister for many years, and I always find him to be in command of whatever situation he faces." Huckabee went on to say, "I can't imagine anyone being as rock solid to lead Israel during such an existential crisis. We conveyed to him our support for Israel and the Jewish people and our confidence in his leadership." And Huckabee went on to say, "The Prime Minister has shown a steely resolve to carry out the mission of eliminating the terrorist threat of Hamas. He's a steady head and hand in an unsteady time, unquote. That said, I want to make one other point here before we close this particular YouTube exclusive video. Meeting senior political leaders here in Israel wasn't the primary objective of our delegation. A delegation that Huckabee and I organized, that was sponsored by All Israel News and the Rosenberg Report and the Joshua Fund. But we weren't there mainly to see Netanyahu or other senior Israeli officials, though we did. Over the course of 3 days, the delegation toured Kfar Aza, one of the 22 Israeli communities along the Gaza border that were savaged by the Hamas invasion and slaughter of October 7th. It was important for us to walk through those blood-stained homes that are basically reduced to rubble, and see the pockmark of bullet holes everywhere, and see where Hamas terrorists burned Israelis alive in their homes. It was important for evangelical leaders to see it. We met with and were briefed by officials in the Israeli city of Sderot, the largest Israeli city on the Gaza border, and one of the other 22 Israeli communities invaded by Hamas on October 7th. We met with the mayor there and others. We met with and heard the personal stories of 3 Israeli hostage families in Tel Aviv. We met with and listened to a group of American lone soldiers in Jerusalem, U.S. Israeli soldiers whose families live in the States or elsewhere and aren't here to help them, encourage them, stand with them. So there's organizations here in Israel that do provide meals and places to stay and encouragement and friendship for soldiers who are far away from their family amidst combat situations. We met with and were briefed by Jewish and Christian NGO leaders who are providing humanitarian relief, humanitarian aid to Israelis and Palestinians. We met with leaders from the Joshua Fund, the ministry that my wife and I started 17 years ago. We met with leaders from Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Graham's organization. And we met with Yael Eckstein, who's the leader of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. She's Orthodox Jewish, but she works with evangelical supporters to provide enormous amounts of humanitarian relief aid here. So we wanted to sit with them and talk to them and hear what they're seeing and what they're doing. We were interviewed by Israeli and American reporters about what we've seen and heard during our time in the land. We met with, prayed with, and were briefed by Israeli and Palestinian pastors and ministry leaders. Again, those conversations were sensitive and off the record, so I can't really share with you, but I wanted you to know that we didn't just sit with Israeli evangelicals and Messianic Jews. We also sat with Palestinian Arab evangelicals to hear their heart, hear their concerns, their fears, their frustrations, and to pray together with them and to tell them we're with them. We prayed for the liberation of Gaza from Hamas. With the Israelis. The Palestinians, we didn't ask them to pray for that. We prayed with the Israeli side for a decisive victory over Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian regime. We prayed for the immediate release, of course, of all the remaining hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. We prayed for the protection of all Israeli soldiers. We prayed for the protection of all Palestinians, including the 1,000 or so Palestinian Christians who are still in Gaza and who are, have had a very, very, very difficult and dangerous few months. We prayed for the physical, emotional, and spiritual healing for all Israelis and Palestinians who've been traumatized by this war, and we're going to continue praying for that. And we, of course, prayed here in Jerusalem for the peace of Jerusalem and everybody in this region, according to Psalm 122. That's why we brought this delegation, to hear, to see what's really happening, and to pray, to encourage, and to show both Israelis and Palestinians that we love them, and we're not going to abandon them. And I just wanted to give you this update. It would have been nice if we could have done it right as the delegation happened, but the delegation ended just before Christmas Eve, just 2 days before that, and they all headed home for Christmas vacation, and we headed into Christmas here and New Year's as well. So as the New Year begins, I wanted to share with you about the delegation, and you can see more coverage of the delegation here on YouTube, on the Rosenberg Report, and of course all the coverage on All Israel News. And then I wanted to share with you about this meeting. I did a column for All Israel News about the governors and my meeting with Netanyahu, but this was my first opportunity to share with you and sort of go into a little bit more detail of what we saw and heard and my analysis of the meeting. Thank you. I wanted to share that with you. Again, my bottom line message is it's going to be a very hard year for Israel and her neighbors in 2024. I feel grieved for all the Lebanese people, all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, as well as the people in Iran, because they're trapped by horrific genocidal regimes. They are bringing, those regimes, those terrorist groups are bringing war and destruction on themselves. But Israel doesn't really have a choice. I wish we did. I wish we could say, look, let's just call it quits. But I don't see how that's possible right now. I know there are Christians in the Arab world who are saying, that people like me are just terrible people because we support war. No, it's not that we support war, but the Bible says there's a time for war and there's a time for peace. And Israel didn't start these wars. Israel's reacting, and we don't have any moral authority to just let our people be slaughtered. But nor do we want to see such devastation happen to our neighbors. But right now, that's where we are. That's why we need to keep in prayer. That's why we need to keep praying for Israel's leaders to have wisdom and courage and strength to get us to the end zone here. But I'm not putting all my hope in the Israeli government or in any government. I'm putting all my hope in the Lord Jesus Christ, who has all authority in heaven and earth. I know He loves Israel, and I know He loves our neighbors, and I pray that He will guide us to victory and to peace. And that's my update. This is Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem as we kick off 2024 with this YouTube exclusive for the Rosenberg Report.